What if the most terrifying monsters in history weren't born from human imagination, but from divine rebellion? And what if their story isn't just a myth, but a forbidden chapter of our past, one that's been deliberately hidden from view? For centuries, a few mysterious verses in the book of Genesis have hinted at a strange and unsettling events that took place right before the Great Flood. An event so bizarre, it's often just skipped over. But what if those verses are only the tip of the iceberg? What if another ancient text, one considered so dangerous it was left out of the Bible, claims to tell the full story? This is the story of the Nephilim, and it begins, not on earth, but in the heavens, with a rebellion that would unleash chaos on the world and stain the very fabric of creation. In the beginning, when the world was young and humanity was just finding its feet, we weren't alone. We were being watched. An order of celestial beings, known in some ancient texts as the Watchers, had been sent to observe the fledgling human race. They were angels, divine guardians with one sacred rule: guide and protect, but never, ever interfere. For a while, they did their jobs, watching from that invisible boundary between heaven and earth. They watched as humanity grew, and as the daughters of men, as Genesis calls them, filled the world with their beauty. But over time, watching turned into obsession. A deep and forbidden desire began to grow inside these heavenly beings. They were spirits, meant to be above mortal passion, yet they found themselves consumed by an earthly lust for the very women they were sworn only to protect. This wasn't just a slip-up, it was a conspiracy, a deliberate and catastrophic decision. To get the gruesome details that Genesis only hints at, we have to turn to the ancient and controversial Book of Enoch. This text, not included in the Bible, claims the rebellion was sealed with a formal pact. 200 of these watchers, led by an angel named Semjaza, came down from the heavens and gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon. The name of the mountain itself might be a clue. Some scholars believe it's derived from the Hebrew word Herem, which means a curse. It was on this cursed peak that they swore a binding oath, sealing their pact with a curse upon themselves if any of them backed out. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were about to break a fundamental law of creation. The Book of Enoch describes this moment with chilling detail. Semjaza, their leader, said to them, "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." But they all answered him back, "Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." And so they swore, 200 angels, abandoning their posts, choosing to fall. So, why was this act so terrible? In the cosmic order, angels and humans were meant to be separate. Angels were spirit, humans were flesh. That boundary was absolute, designed by God to keep creation in balance. For a watcher to take a human wife wasn't just lust. It was a violation of divine law, a shattering of the sacred order. It was cosmic treason. They weren't just falling from grace. They were choosing to drag the entire world down with them, mixing the heavenly with the earthly in a way that was never intended. This pact on Mount Hermon was the first domino to fall, setting off a chain reaction that would lead to monstrous births, unimaginable corruption, and a judgment so severe it would require wiping the slate clean. The Watchers had made their choice, and as they came down from the mountain to claim their prize, the world stood on the edge of a nightmare. Having sealed their pact, the 200 Watchers descended among the early tribes of humanity. They appeared before the daughters of men, and as Genesis 6 says, they took for their wives as many of them as they chose. You can imagine that at first, this might have seemed like a blessing. These weren't hideous demons, but glorious beings of light, angels from the sky. Marrying one would have been seen as a divine honor. The women they chose became the partners of gods, and the children born from these unions were unlike any humans that had come before. Genesis 6 verse 4 gives us this tantalizing description. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The word Nephilim itself comes from the Hebrew root naphal, which means to fall. They were, quite literally, the fallen ones. But in their early days, they were celebrated, not feared. Imagine beings of immense size and strength, with some of the power of their angel fathers and the physical bodies of their human mothers. They were demigods, the heroes of old, who likely inspired the myths and legends of cultures all over the world for centuries to come. This was a new age, an age of wonders. The Nephilim were powerful and charismatic. It's easy to speculate they became the first kings, the first warlords, building empires with their superhuman strength. Humanity would have looked up to them as leaders. Meanwhile, their Watcher fathers weren't just standing by. According to the Book of Enoch, they began teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, secrets from heaven that mortals were never supposed to learn. One angel, named Azazel, taught men how to make weapons, swords, knives, and shields. Suddenly, humanity was armed for war. Other angels taught sorcery, enchantments, and how to read the stars. They revealed the art of cosmetics to women, which Enoch claims fueled vanity and promiscuity. In short, the Watchers gave humanity the tools for advanced warfare, the keys to occult power, and the vanities that can corrupt the soul. They put human civilization on a fast track to corruption. This blending of divine knowledge and human ambition created a society that was technologically advanced but spiritually rotten. The sin wasn't just physical. It was the catastrophic spiritual and genetic contamination that followed. Some modern theological interpretations even suggest this was a deliberate attack by the forces of darkness. In this view, the goal was to corrupt the human bloodline so thoroughly that a prophesied human Messiah could never be born. By polluting the human genome, the Watchers were trying to sabotage God's entire plan for humanity. The world was now filled with these hybrid beings, the Nephilim, and humanity was armed with knowledge it wasn't ready for. At first glance, it might have looked like a golden age, but it was a poisoned paradise. A being born from a violation can't bring peace. Their heroic reputation was just a mask, hiding a monstrous nature that was about to break free. The golden age of the Nephilim didn't last long. There was a fatal flaw baked into their very nature, a flaw that would soon devour them and the world around them. The Book of Enoch paints a horrifying picture of their shift from heroes to ravenous monsters. Their huge size and power came with a matching appetite. The giants began to consume everything humanity produced, the grain, the livestock, all of it. Soon, the earth itself couldn't feed them. And when the humans' food ran out, the Nephilim's hunger turned on humanity itself. The text says they turned against them and devoured mankind. This was the true beginning of the horror. The demigods became cannibals, hunting the very people who once worshipped them. The world spiraled into a state of unending terror. But it didn't stop there. After preying on humans, the Nephilim began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. They became a force of pure destruction, a cancer on the face of the earth. The natural order was completely flipped upside down. The forbidden knowledge their fathers gave them only made the chaos worse. Humans, now armed with advanced weapons, waged war on each other with sickening brutality. The earth itself began to cry out. The Book of Enoch describes the planet groaning under the weight of all the bloodshed and lawlessness. The souls of the dead cried out to heaven, their voices rising in a chorus of agony, begging for someone to intervene. The corruption was absolute, not just moral, but genetic and environmental. The world God had created had been turned into a slaughterhouse, ruled by bloodthirsty giants and steeped in dark arts taught by rebellious angels. This was the ultimate result of the Watchers' sin. Their lust had created a race of monsters, and their forbidden knowledge had given humanity the tools to destroy itself. The very fabric of creation was tearing apart. It was a world so thoroughly polluted that it seemed beyond saving. So, what exactly were these Nephilim? Were they just big guys, or something else? The ancient texts call them giants, but their real horror, according to this tradition, wasn't just their size. It was their hybrid nature. They were an unholy fusion of spirit and flesh, beings that should not exist. This might be why their spirits were believed to be different from human spirits, trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. Imagine a world where the heroes you worship suddenly turn on you. A world where your guardians become your predators. This was the world before the flood. And as the cries of the oppressed reached the heavens, it became clear that this level of corruption could not be allowed to stand. A judgment was coming, and it would have to be just as absolute as the corruption it needed to erase. The cries from a ravaged earth did not go unheard. In the courts of heaven, the archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, looked down on the carnage and were filled with grief. They saw the bloodshed, the oppression, and the dark secrets that the fallen Watchers had unleashed. Turning to God, they made their case. The Book of Enoch details their plea, describing how Azazel had taught unrighteousness and how Simjaza's pact had filled the whole earth with blood and sin. God's response was one of profound sorrow and firm judgment. He saw that his creation had been hijacked and its purpose twisted. A cleansing was needed. A divine intervention was required to cut out the cancer of the Nephilim and their influence before it became permanent. The decision was made. A great flood would wash the world clean. But before the deluge, judgment came for the criminals themselves. The archangel Raphael was told to bind the fallen angel Azazel hand and foot and throw him into total darkness in the desert to remain there until the final day of judgment, a fitting end for the one who taught violence. Gabriel was given a grim and poetic task to destroy the children of the Watchers. He was commanded to incite the Nephilim against one another. God would make the giants the tools of their own destruction. Imagine the horrific sight. Monstrous sons turning on their brothers, a cataclysmic civil war among demigods, their immense strength now used to tear each other apart. They who devoured the world would now devour themselves, perishing by each other's swords before the floodwaters even began to rise. Finally, the archangel Michael was commanded to bind Simjaza and the other Watchers. They were to be imprisoned in the hidden valleys of the earth, forced to watch the destruction of their own children, and then endure millennia of imprisonment until their final judgment in an abyss of fire. Their appeal for forgiveness, delivered through Enoch, was rejected. God declared that they, as eternal spirits, should have been praying for humans, not the other way around. With the architects of chaos imprisoned and their monstrous children annihilated, the stage was set for the final cleansing. God instructed Noah, a righteous man in a corrupt world, to build an ark. Seen through this lens, the Great Flood wasn't just a punishment for human sin. It was a necessary event to erase the genetic and spiritual stain of the Watchers and the Nephilim. It was a reset button for creation, washing away the remnants of a world broken by angels who chose to become monsters. The Great Flood receded, and the world was born again. The monstrous reign of the Nephilim was over, their physical bodies destroyed. The rebellious Watchers were bound in darkness. It seems like the problem was solved, but ancient texts leave us with some deeply unsettling questions. The story, it seems, wasn't quite finished. First, what happened to the spirits of the Nephilim? The Book of Enoch offers a terrifying legacy. Because they were born of both spirit and flesh, their deaths were unique. Their bodies died, but their spiritual essence, being part angel, couldn't pass on like a human soul. Instead, their spirits were cursed to roam the earth as evil spirits. This theory, which you won't find in the canonical Bible, suggests that the disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim are what we now call demons. It would explain their relentless urge to possess physical bodies. They're trying to reclaim the life they lost. Even more troubling is a cryptic phrase in the Bible itself. Genesis 6 verse 4, after introducing the Nephilim, says they were on the earth in those days and also afterward, after the flood that was supposed to have wiped them out. How is that possible? The Old Testament seems to hint at an answer. Hundreds of years after the flood, when Israelite spies scout the land of Canaan, they come back with a chilling report. In Numbers 13:33, they claim, "We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." They explicitly connect the giants they saw, the Anakim, to the original Nephilim. Throughout the Old Testament, we hear about these post-flood giant clans, the Rephaim, the Emim, and others. We read about Og, a giant king whose bed was over 13 feet long. And of course, there's Goliath, the Philistine champion. Now, whether these were literal, biological descendants, or if the term Nephilim was just used to describe any frighteningly large enemy, is a topic of debate among scholars. Some argue the genetic line survived somehow, perhaps through the wives of Noah's sons. Others see it as a literary echo, a way to describe the formidable evil facing Israel. Either way, the legacy of the Nephilim became a recurring obstacle for the ancient Israelites. In this light, the story of David and Goliath becomes more than an underdog tale. It's a symbolic final showdown with the lingering seed of that ancient, cosmic rebellion. And so, the forbidden story of the Nephilim doesn't have a clean ending. It leaves us with a chilling possibility that the monsters created by angels were never fully vanquished. Their physical lineage may have haunted the ancient world for centuries, and according to some traditions, their restless spirits may continue to haunt it to this day. The story of the Nephilim is a stark reminder that some ancient texts contain mysteries that challenge our whole understanding of the world. It's a story so profound that ancient authors felt the need to write entire books, like the Book of Enoch, just to explain it. So what do you believe? Should the Book of Enoch, with its wild details about fallen angels and their monster children, be taken seriously? Or is it just ancient fiction? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into a forbidden story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, The Chronicles of Truth, for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries. And don't forget to ring the bell so you get notified when we uncover the next hidden story. Thank you for watching.